Mena Watch, der unabhängige Nahost-Think Tank.
A very warm welcome, Professor Wolffsohn. Are you managing all right with this weather? I'm so glad you could make it. There's heavy snow in Vienna. It's storming and snowing, a meter of snow outside, but we managed it anyway.
Spring will come.
Spring will arrive, as sure as amen in a prayer typically, but a little later today. Professor Wolffsohn, you've written a highly acclaimed book about the conductor Herbert von Karajan. Before we get to the core thesis and the motivation, why would one write a book about Karajan in 2026? Hasn't absolutely everything already been said about him?
Yes, some people thought so, and I myself had that thought as well, but I was asked if I would conduct an investigation into whether Karajan was in fact a Nazi or not. And I found that this earnest request and concern from Karajan's daughters, they truly wanted to know what the actual situation was. Some asserted, yes, he was a Nazi. Others maintained he was not a Nazi. They have a legitimate interest in producing a meticulous work. Well, that's the Karajan family's problem, but it's certainly not mine, you see. What truly captivated my interest from the outset, and always had, long before the Karajan case came to me, was the profound juxtaposition between high culture and a criminal regime, or more broadly speaking, the inherent tension between culture and politics itself. And this is a very relevant topic. To what extent can, should, or ought culture be apolitical or indeed be political? Cases we're all familiar with now in connection with the Gaza war or Ms. Netrebko and so on. And that's a subject that no one with an interest in both culture and politics can possibly sidestep.
There's already extensive scientific research regarding Karajan. Did you discover new sources, or what exactly is your research based on?
Oh yes, I've really delved into a multitude of new sources, searching for them and then uncovering them. I meticulously examined the existing documentation and how earlier biographies utilized their sources, and I was genuinely astonished that there were clearly noticeable gaps. Allow me to provide you with a very specific example. Karajan conducted in Ulm for an extended period, specifically from 1929 to 1934. However, the documents within the Ulm city archives had never been thoroughly analyzed or examined by anyone prior to this point. Or let's consider a different subject. There was an exceptionally intense rivalry that existed between Karajan and Bernstein. Apparently, some claimed, while others actually stated it was indeed a friendship. Right, but the Bernstein estate remained completely untouched, truly pristine, before my research assistant at the Library of Congress thoroughly evaluated this collection on my behalf. Or a very close friend of Herbert von Karajan, who was Jewish Austrian cultural activist, a prominent agent deeply involved in the cultural scene, named Henry Alter, who later became known as Alter in America. He was a significant figure. Yes, a very close friend of Karajan. This is something that you read about constantly, but absolutely no one has ever sought out his estate, let alone thoroughly evaluated it. Yes, it's located at the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, D.C., and so on and so forth. And last but certainly not least, and most importantly, I was able to obtain the private correspondence of Karajan's first wife through the descendants of Elmi von Karajan herself. It had never been evaluated. I made this known to the public through various media outlets and announcements. There's this one particular study, and if anyone could provide written or even spoken documents, they would be most welcome indeed. Yes, that's how it happened. Or in what was basically a self-published work, his second wife's niece compiled and published the collected letters of his second wife, Anita Nee Gutermann of Gutermann's Sewing Thread, which I could analyze for the very first time, and so on. And then, most importantly, the thesis in the air that Karajan was an anti-Semite. There are two undeniable pieces of evidence for that, specifically from the late 1920s and early 1930s, but absolutely nothing else exists. So, that particularly intrigued me because a true Nazi inherently embodies genuine anti-Semitism, although as a conductor he couldn't personally engage in exterminatory anti-Semitism, he functioned as a cog within the extermination machinery of the Nazis' genocidal anti-Semitism. Well, then you realize he had many close friends, including Jewish friends, after 1945, who knew precisely what Karajan did not do during the Third Reich, that he was indeed a member of the NSDAP, but essentially nothing beyond that. That his first concertmaster, whose autobiographical writings I was able to analyze, came together with him on an individual level as a sign of reconciliation between perpetrators and victims, at least from a collective perspective. These are all entirely new documents, and even well-intentioned criticisms, for which I am truly grateful, are also quite intelligent, as nothing is worse than unintelligent approval and misguided praise. Then I'd much rather have a clever critique. But many new documents were indeed evaluated, and thus a completely fresh perspective was presented.
You describe Karajan as a formal Nazi. Could you explain that term to me?
It's quite simple, really. What does Nazi actually mean? Is the identification with Nazism a decisive factor? Yes. Or perhaps a party member was compelled to join due to their professional circumstances. We also know, for example, that there were some SS members, a very small number, of course, who reported on the Holocaust to the outside world, conveying what was happening. So even in that instance, you need to examine it more carefully. It doesn't mean granting the SS, a criminal organization, a clean slate. So, in a nutshell, if someone is a party member, that's not automatically a sign of their conviction. My decisive question was, beyond being the formal Nazi that he was he also an ideological Nazi? For that, I must develop a historian's toolkit to, so to speak, truly delve into the inner workings of an individual's mind. And for that, private letters, for example, are very important. For this purpose, documents from friends, from close acquaintances, or even from severe critics are absolutely essential and highly significant. And naturally, I also thoroughly analyze the documents provided by his most fervent, sharp critics. And there's also, for example, Egon Hilbert, who was incarcerated in Dachau from April 1938 to April 1945. Later, he fiercely contended with Karajan, a rivalry that lasted until their dying breath, but Karajan was never accused, even during their fierce confrontations, of having been a Nazi, and so on and so forth.
Also crucial is his joining the NSDAP, as you mention in your book. Why is it somehow crucial whether he joined in 1933 or 1935? And then there's also the myth, historically unproven, that he attempted it twice before. It only worked on the third try. Why is that so important?
It isn't important. It's just presented by some historians as a decisive criterion.
How do you see it?
I see it as it was because I am guided by the facts. First, it's been misconstrued he joined May 1st. May of 1933 into the Nazi Party. I will provide you with a crucial piece of evidence to support that statement. Even if he had actually been admitted to the NSDAP on May 1st, 1933, the professional designation on May 1st. In May of 1933, under Karajan, the title was General Music Director. Tough luck, he only became the General Music Director in 1935, you see. So A and B don't match. What does a historian do then? You ask the question, why don't A and B match? Was he, the Nazi bureaucrat, a prophet of sorts, foretelling in 1933 that Karajan would undoubtedly become General Music Director in 1935? Was he really that much of a visionary? So from a methodological standpoint, it's simply ridiculous.
But if you were to break it down simply at its absolute core, what precisely was Karajan's career? How would you define his professional journey?
Karajan was an egocentric. He was someone who, and this is what I find so deeply fascinating, and it's not at all unique to Karajan, a genuine artist, or rather there still are and always have been artists who exist solely within what they perceive as their completely autonomous realm of culture. And that is a fundamental theme of culture in general, just how much politics can, should, or ought to exist within the realm of culture. This isn't a new question, not at all. So, if you take the Greek dramas, for instance, consider plays like the Persians, Indeed. That was a deeply political play. Soon after the Persian Wars, which Athens had emerged victorious from, the author, who himself had fought against the Persians, penned a compelling manifesto of humanity, specifically lamenting mother of the Persian king Xerxes, portrayed from the victor's perspective, so to speak. That was pure politics, in other words, to show compassion, even for the victor and all that kind of thing. Well, you see, the story of history doesn't just start with us, the living. There was already something before us, and the Karajan problem is that he is also dead. But we still have the Karajan problem today, the Gaza war. Many self-proclaimed artists, or even genuine artists, believe it's their absolute duty to inform everyone about the Gaza war, whether it is this or that, despite lacking any comprehension of military affairs or the intricacies of the Middle East conflict. But people have opinions because culture must be political, regardless of my knowledge or lack thereof. Or the soccer player who gives out voting recommendations. I beg your pardon, is that considered a statement? Yes, it's freedom of speech, naturally. But does it have anything to do with knowledge? Nothing at all?
So, was Karajan an anti-Semite or not?
Definitely not.
How can that be explained?
You have to read the book for that. You have to read the book. In any case, you can't just...
But that's a main accusation against him.
Yes, certainly, but the accusation is based on two quotes, and on a misinterpretation of what German national truly signifies. German national, both within the specific Austrian context and also in the broader German context. Because in the Austrian context, the question that famously arose after the First World War was this: should Austria become a part of the German Reich, or could it even be allowed to? There were vehement proponents of this, not least Karl Renner, famously the first federal president of the new Austria, a social democrat who, as is also well known, did not exactly cover himself in glory during the Nazi era. However, the desire to become part of the German Reich after World War I was a truly genuine wish felt among the Austrian populace. And the prohibition of Austria's accession to the German Reich had absolutely nothing to do with the issue of self-determination, which, as a matter of fact, had been declared by the victorious powers. That was such a blatant breach of the promise of the points from then U.S. President Wilson. So, in short, you have to look more closely. No, and I wouldn't have written 368 pages if I were supposed to answer this question in a few minutes. If one takes these accusations seriously, which one certainly must do when working diligently and professionally, then it becomes apparent that it's a sloppy, scientifically unacceptable approach to the matter.
I mentioned earlier that there are many well-intentioned criticisms regarding your book, and naturally there are some who don't find it all that great. One of them is...
I don't. So far I know only a quite shallow...
Exactly, that's the Viennese contemporary historian Oliver Rathkolb, who has also dealt with this.
He's a colleague. He's annoyed, but...
He says it's a kind of whitewashing of Karajan. How do you respond to that?
Opinions are free. And I don't want to engage in colleague bashing. He has published, I have published, and everyone can form their own opinion, and therefore I will not strike back here. It's not my style, and I believe in the discerning reader. And compare A with B and decide for yourself.
Before we change the subject and move on to the Middle East, one last question. You hinted at it earlier. What does the historical reappraisal of Karajan, or the story of Karajan, say about our current time, about today?
The eternal theme. 1. The autonomy of art. Does art for art's sake exist? We know it from literature, we know it from music, and of course in theatre, so in culture in general. That's a permanent question that one must always grapple with. If one thinks that someone who isn't entrenched in the political realm absolutely must express their opinion on everything and everyone, opinions are programmatically indeed free. But as an individual or a group, is it truly necessary for me to invariably voice my opinion, or should I do so? It also depends on how important you consider yourself to be. And there are a lot of self-important people. That's also part of culture, of course, because cultural figures seek an audience. They must have their audience. This means whether and to what extent the political gesture, or perhaps a political gesticulation, is truly a part of one's own public relations effort. That possibility cannot be entirely excluded, to phrase it carefully. By all means, it's a free country, thank goodness for that. And there isn't just one answer to it. You should be politically active, or you shouldn't be politically active. I am a truly committed, dyed-in-the-wool liberal. If someone says, I will limit myself to what I do best, which is to contribute to my particular cultural domain, whether it be music, literature, or whatever it may be, and others say, no, I simply must get involved, as the new buzzword always goes. To that I say, please go right ahead.
This means that culture is allowed to, must, or indeed can get involved.
But that's an individual decision, isn't it? Who am I to dictate to anyone, you must do this? While I might be vain, I'm certainly not unhinged, and I truly believe is an immodesty of the unwelcome kind if one feels compelled to offer an opinion on absolutely everything, or, as a Berliner would say, to interject their 2 cents. You can certainly do that, but then, if I'm genuinely convinced of what I'm doing and aim to persuade those who hold different views, I should at the very least present those alternative opinions and then logically counter them rather than simply stating, you. Don't think exactly as I do, therefore you belong in the underworld. That, unfortunately, is the current state of public debate. But I find this to be fundamentally a rather dire development, ultimately originating from a way of thinking, and here we arrive at the Third Reich, that is, in essence, a friend-foe mentality, very much in line with Carl Schmitt's philosophy. People always say black and white. No, it's friend-foe thinking. And if you're not my friend, if you don't want to be, then I'll smash your skull in. And we are also witnessing an ever-growing escalation of violence within our society. And when even those who supposedly believe and prioritize their own way of thinking above all else, condemning anyone who doesn't think or act exactly as they do, then those individuals become the very legitimizers of violence within society. Is that something carefully considered by those who are constantly demanding political engagement from everyone? Apparently not. But what then is the increase in violence connected to? And it's not exclusively immigrants. We also encounter a significant amount of what one might call indigenous or domestically generated violence. And that certainly has its reasons. I'm not saying this is the sole cause, but it's definitely one of them. And when intellectuals themselves are already resorting to violence simply through their words and language, then it's quite clear. Then it becomes absolutely clear that those who mindlessly repeat what's said, like parrots, will then act in accordance with those actions. And when we talk about the book burnings during the Third Reich, Heinrich Heine is often quoted, "Those who burn books will in the end burn people." Well, and is it any different today with violent words? Any different today? Are they quoting Heine but utterly failing to grasp the true essence of his message? This brings us to the total deficits of those who have accumulated knowledge. They are academics, yet they are not intellectuals, because to be an intellectual requires intelligere, which means to perceive, to comprehend, to truly grasp, both inter and also behind.
To question things.
Exactly. And I believe we are experiencing a truly alarming development. And what makes it even more terrible is that this kind of thinking, this presumed way of speaking and acting, is occurring within the very institutions considered the elite centers of thought, specifically at universities and cultural establishments. And then people are surprised that violence has increased. This means that those who, cloaked in the protective armor of their thoughts, acting as the legitimizers of violence, are truly the actual instigators and arsonists behind it all.
We need to discuss that further, especially Carl Schmitt and his relevance today.
Carl Schmitt is more interesting here than the friend-foe categorization.
We could discuss that much longer, especially Carl Schmitt and his theses, which are very contemporary and widely received and debated today. I'd like to say thank you for the conversation and all the best with the book.
Mena Watch, der unabhängige Nahost-Think Tank. Besuchen Sie auch unsere Website. Dort finden Sie täglich neue aktuelle Berichte und ausführliche wissenschaftlich fundierte Hintergrundanalysen zur Geschichte und Gegenwart der MENA-Region.